Last month, the Universal Music Group released the latest CD by American cello virtuoso Bion Tsang. Titled Cantabile, this latest CD features two of the most important works for cello and orchestra: Schumann's A minor cello concerto and Tchaikovsky's Rococo variations. Joining Bion Tsang on the recording is the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, which is led by conductor and violinist Scott Yu. For those unfamiliar with cellist Bion Tsang, at age 11, he made his debut with the New York Philharmonic under Zhu Maeda, and since then has performed with such orchestras as the Atlanta Symphony, the Hong Kong Philharmonic, the American Symphony Orchestra, to name just a few. He has collaborated with musicians such as Jamie Laredo, Anna-Kiko Myers, Yo-Yo Ma, and Leon Fleischer, amongst others, and has recorded 12 CDs for such labels as Harmonica Mundi and Sony Classical. And joining me here over Zoom, I am joined by Bion Tsang. Hi, Bion. It's good to have you
Hi,
here over Zoom.
Chris. Thanks
Mm.
for having me.
The CD Cantabile is just so great. A big congratulations on this really fantastic
Thank you.
recording.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun to make. It took a while, but COVID got in the way.
I actually saw some of the behind the scenes footage from this recording. It was on Scott Yu's latest series, Now Hear This, that he did for
Correct.
PBS. Uh,
Yes.
I I spoke with Scott in April to promote this latest series of Now Hear This. Uh, I'm going to start the conversation out by asking, you recorded this CD with him. How long have the two of you been friends? And can you talk about your relationship with him and the Royal Scottish National Orchestra? This is your
Y-
second recording with them, right?
Yes. Yes. So Scott and I go back to, I want to say somewhere around, well, it was the early 90s. I can't remember the exact year now. Our first concert together was with the Boston Chamber Music Society. And I remember that performance vividly. We were playing the Franck Piano Quintet, and we just hit it off right from the start during those rehearsals and the performance. And then I started to see him practically, well, yeah, pretty much every summer from I think it was around '96. We were together at the Seattle Chamber Music Festival, and so we played like so many works together. And then, of course, Scott's career turned to conducting, and I've since worked with him a number of times. With him conducting. So when I was thinking about making concerto recordings, of course, the first thought was, well, I've got to grab Scott. So that's how that kind of came to be, and the orchestra was pretty much chosen by our producer, Michael Fine. And our first disc with Dvorak and Enescu was done with them, and so the Tchaikovsky actually was originally intended to be part of that recording, but it wouldn't fit. All three pieces wouldn't fit. So I was already planning to go back to have another recording with the RSNO, and so it meant then taking pieces and fitting it around the Tchaikovsky, and that's this Tchaikovsky being not just a virtuoso piece, but such a wonderful vehicle for the singing qualities of the cello. That's when I pivoted and thought, well, let me make this album about singing and that quality of the cello.
Mm-hmm. One of the centerpieces on the CD is Schumann's A minor cello concerto. But what makes this recording so unique is that you actually follow Schumann's actual markings. Can you talk about this a bit? Apparently, in the original manuscript, there were markings that weren't his, and I believe a friend of yours discovered that, right? Can you talk about how that affects the cello
Yes,
concerto?
yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was just by sheer coincidence that I had already known about the history of um, the first publication not really honoring Schumann's intent, and it was it's a lot to kind of go through that manuscript and try to make sense of it. And as I was doing that, lo and behold, I discovered that my wife's old roommate, Josephine Knight, happened to release a new edition that has all these, has sifted through all the markings. The markings are in pencil versus, of course, the Schumann's manuscript is in pen.
Mhm.
So, but the differentiation is difficult to understand, and some of it is about the handwriting, is that number one from Schumann or the cellist that went through it and uh, wrote right on the manuscript, which I don't know if that was common at the time, that when a composer would hand it over to an instrumentalist to look over, that instrumentalist would then write onto the manuscript. But that was what was sent to the publisher, and that's how cellists have known the piece is through that highly edited version. Um, and and so, in some ways, you could argue it's more cellistic, the first edition, but I don't think that Schumann was really thinking about, what works well for the cello. Not that it doesn't work well for the cello, but he was after something very specific, emotionally. And so by taking away a lot of the slurs, that's the biggest part of it, is the slurs. Then the other part is the dynamics. Um, but the slurs kind of classicize it in a way, and by taking those away, it becomes more direct emotionally, I feel. Um,
Yeah. There's this wonderful moment, and again, I'm going to refer back to the Now Hear This episode that you were in, where you're playing the solo part with the section cello. That's
yeah.
take one, and then take two is you with the principal cellist of the Royal Scottish National. And in the
Hmm.
end, you went with just this pairing, and you said that it was like Schumann is trying to converse with Clara, and that's
Correct.
the case,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I do find that this piece is somewhat autobiographical. It represents his struggle with bipolar disorder, and the rock that Schumann's wife, Clara, becomes to him, his steadying hand, and how he then triumphs in the end in dealing with this, living with it. He's accepted it, and it doesn't really bother him anymore.
And then there's that wonderful place where the two of you play the opening with the original markings and then without the markings. And what a contrast. You go
Yeah,
from this very sort of passionate opening of the concerto to its sort of more lyrical singing quality of first
right.
movement, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's
So not so extreme. It's more subtle, that there's this underlying current of the two sides of his personality that he knows he has, and he's not so outward with it. Whereas typically that's what we do here, is that oh, woe is me.
yeah. Um, the other big piece on the CD is Tchaikovsky's Rococo Variations. I'm going to first start out by asking, do you think the piece is cantabile, or is it a cello showpiece, or is it both things?
Oh, it's certainly both. There's no question. Of course, Tchaikovsky, arguably the greatest writer of melody, and he does use the cello a lot,
Mm,
in his symphonies. And so, yes, absolutely. There's throughout. It's always singing, but he asks things of the cellist that I don't think really have ever been asked before, by any other composer. So it is a wonderful showpiece, that cellists just love to play, to say, hey, look what we can do. We can keep up with the violinists.
yeah, and we're doing some reading about the Rococo Variations, and in some ways, it's similar to the Schumann Concerto. With the Schumann Concerto, as we talked about, you have a second party, so sort of going in and making markings. But for
Correct.
Tchaikovsky, the second person was the cellist Wilhelm Fitzhagen, and apparently he helped a lot in the Rococo
Yeah,
variations. Can
yeah,
you talk about his contribution a bit?
yes, absolutely. I have to confess that, you know, if I were to do this disc over again, I wonder if I would have recorded the original. I think that would have probably in you know balanced better with the Schumann in the sense in that sense that you know going back to the original. But that being said, I mean Tchaikovsky did certainly sanction this version, and there it's completely different. I mean it comes across in a different way. In you know there are two manuscripts to the Tchaikovsky Rococo variations. One they're both in Tchaikovsky hand, but the orchestration which came later, the cello part is actually written out by Witzenhagen, and Tchaikovsky allowed him to do that. Um, so in that sense, it is authentic.
And one of the other things I was reading about is apparently Fitzenhagen, he would like change the order of the variations. Is that right? When
That
he
is right.
performed?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. So the last variation, which ends, you know, it's fast and what we come to expect in the last movement. That is actually two separate variations that half of it occurs much earlier, and then of course the end is still original. But then he just he reorders it so that he can paste those two variations together and it becomes one longer a virtuoso flourish at the end.
So I have to ask, have you played the other version of the Rococo variations? Have you ever performed it?
I've never performed it. I came close to performing it, but I have to confess I kind of chickened out because I just didn't know it as well as the other, and
Mm.
so at last minute I asked the conductor, "Can we do the Fitzenhagen?" He said, "Yes, sure. We have both versions in the library. We can do the Fitzenhagen."
Um, I'm going to finish up the conversation. You've got on the CD, it's really interesting. You bookended it with two versions of Pablo Casal's Song of the Birds. Why did you do that?
Well, I wanted there to be an arc. Um, since there are two Tchaikovsky pieces, two Casals versions, two Casals pieces, if you will, and then the Schumann right smack in the middle, with of course, it's just convenient that that's that slow movement, the heart of the Schumann, that the duet with uh, Robert and Clara is the centerpiece. I thought it would make a nice arc, mirror image. And so also I wanted to end on a very personal note by just ending by myself. So it starts with the original Casals version where it's with cello and string orchestra, and then at the end I do my best attempt to recreate all of that all by myself.
Yeah, and it works beautifully. It's really lovely.
Thank
Uh,
you.
this has been so great to meet you and talk to you about the spectacular recording. I got to ask, are you going to be touring with this rep? And if so, any chance of you stopping by Winnipeg to perform with our Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra?
Well, no plans just yet to my Winnipeg. You can certainly put in a good word for me with the orchestra. We'll see if we can make that happen soon.
Yeah, just talk to Scott. He's performed. He's conducted here before, and
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. This has been great. Beyond, thanks again for taking the time to talk with me today. It's
Thank
been a
you
lot
for
of
having
fun.
me, Chris. Okay, take
All
care.
right.
Bye.